UUJEC.
Thank you, Terry.
So thank you, Gregory. I guess you're going to do the intros, the rest of the intros, right?
Yes. So welcome, everybody. Thank you for having me, and thank you, Cindy, for pulling this all together, and for Carmen for being here. I am going to read Carmen's bio, but I'm going to read it before she speaks so that we all have it fresh in our minds. And Cindy's going to speak first. So let me go ahead and introduce her. But our two speakers tonight are COP delegate and observer, Cindy Piester, whose talk is titled, "We Must Have Peace to Meet the Objectives of the Paris Agreement." And our second speaker is Bolivian climate negotiator, Carmen Capriles, who will be speaking on peace building for multilateralism and sustainable development. And again, I'll read Cindy's bio here first. Cindy Piester, born on the day that the United States bombed Hiroshima, is the daughter of a World War II combat veteran and the widow of a Vietnam veteran, and thus has lived her whole life in the shadow of war. Cindy is a UUJEC.
I got the timer on over here. Okay.
Can you mute?
We need to ask people to mute. Would everybody mute, please?
Cindy is the
if there's a co-host can go and start muting people.
I think it's Terry.
Yeah, I'll call.
So they're flying from Maryland. Oh, and no. No. That's very, exactly. Nuts, I got the method.
We'll just wait a couple seconds. Sally's gonna call Terry.
I'm sorry, folks. Our board co-chair that normally runs the tech on these things has not been well.
Can you just mute your computer?
Yeah. Oh, yes, I will. I'm sorry. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Well, that's do that. That's like 8 steps.
Terry, can you make some co-host? Can you hear us?
There we go. Cindy is a UUJEC board member and the co-chair of the Peace, Equity, and Climate Task Force, and a member of the International Convocation of Unitarian Universalist Women, the International Environmental Working Group of Women's International, and the International League for Peace and Freedom. Excuse me. She also serves on the steering committee of Veterans for Peace's National Climate Crisis and Militarism Project. She writes for Peace and Planet News, among others, and her recent piece is full of surprises for the uninitiated. Hand it up to you, Cindy.
Thank you so much. Okay, so I just need to pull up my my screen share. Let's see. Just 1 minute, folks.
We see it.
Okay. Okay, friends. You know, for those of us that are unfamiliar with the Unitarian Universalist, it's a faith organization. And this particular UU principle, we have several principles that we try to live by, and our UU principle that impels us to affirm and protect the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part is particularly meaningful when we think about COP and the climate negotiations, that we really are an interdependent community of the entire globe as humans, and that we must work together towards finding solutions. So as we go along here, I will come back to this. I'm also in this talk, I'm focusing a great deal on the role of militarism and wars and peace. And Carmen is going to give us a wonderful presentation on peace. So you'll see that I divert from the COP on occasion. So COP this year was held in Belém, Brazil, on the edge of the Amazon rainforest, 30 years, and then circling back again, as it was also the location of the first climate conference in 1992. And I myself was very happy with COP in some unexpected ways that don't make it into the media. So I will be sharing those with you. Peace for Climate Justice, 10 years after the Paris Agreement, November 10th to November 21st, COP 30. So we went into COP this time. It was the first COP to happen after the International Court of Justice affirmed that states have a legally binding obligation to prevent significant environmental harm and cooperate in good faith to address climate change. And that was released in July. The ICJ ruling repeatedly referred to the science of the IPCC, that's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and the Paris Agreement in support of the 1.5 degrees Celsius limit, which has been a long time goal of COP. That's 1.5 degree rise in temperature over pre-industrial times. And because we were facing going into that very quickly, it was absolutely critical for this COP and for all of us going forward. But COP 30 really faced strong headwinds. Denying climate change, Trump withdrew from the Paris Accord, defunded the United Nations, sent no delegation to COP 30, the first time that's happened. He's expanded fossil fuel production, halted critical regulatory processes, destabilized the global economy with tariffs, including tariffs on the food products from Brazil, because as a threat for them holding their former president, Bolsonaro, accountable for an attempted coup. He did withdraw that recently. However, we're going into COP with all of this disruption in the global community. His threats for war against oil-rich Nigeria and Venezuela on false premises, bombing Venezuelans fishing boats without justification, and ongoing complicity in Israeli genocide. So there was a cloud hanging over COP before we went in. I think that this has had a really chilling impact, particularly on governments providing monies that are needed for our global south. Also, I need to let you know this in case you don't, but there's been a consolidation under the Trump presidency within the US military. He's been firing female and Black officers on charges of promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is really a basic at COP and here in the United States there has been, and he's replacing them with loyalists. And what appears to be reinforce his authoritarian power and could play a role in the next elections. He has deployed U.S. National Guards and masked ICE agents here at home against our own population without regard for the law. Secretary of Defense Hegseth plans to transform the entire military acquisition program to permanent wartime footing. So this is really a cloud over COP, even though what I just read out to you is a domestic situation. It also has impacts internationally. A lot of the people that are being arrested are being sent either back to their home countries or to prisons in other nations, or sometimes just to other nations in general, under horrible conditions. So the Amazon rainforest is right outside of Belém. And President Lula from Brazil really wanted to call attention to the Amazon rainforest. It's a critical part of the lungs of the earth and has been considered that for a very long time. But it has been faced incredible difficulties as a result of legal and illegal deforestation due to agriculture, cattle raising, and fossil fuel extraction. This COP was particularly unique in the presence of the indigenous populations. If you notice, the woman on the left has a very sober face. She says, "Stop the attacks, defend the defenders." The reality of the 400 indigenous tribes of Brazil is that they make up 20% of the global population that have been subjected since 2012 to disappearances and deaths. So we can look at that in terms of the illegal operations in Brazil to gain control of the Amazon rainforest. Very disheartening. I wanted to call out President Lula's opening COP as the COP of implementation of truth, while calling for a roadmap to transition away from fossil fuels. Calling to transition away from fossil fuels is clearly what is needed according to the science of what's going on around the world with climate change, because we just aren't doing it. It's also a very courageous act, in my view, considering the tremendous international petrostate response to this that has stopped COP from being an effective actor in following out the work that it's supposed to do. He also has prioritized the rights, including women and Indigenous, protecting forests, confronting disinformation, and a just transition for workers, all as the part of Miratao. I don't think I'm saying that correctly, but it's a Brazilian word for collective effort. And I really wanted to call that out, because when we think about collective effort, it is when we respect the intersection between all of us, which is a foundational principle of UUs. I also was very impressed by Brazil's COP president, André Correa de Lago. His sincerity and humility were very refreshing. Unlike past COPs, he has been a diplomat and a highly, rather than a highly placed fossil fuels CEO or executive. So this is my first participation in a COP, because this is only my fourth one, and the last three have been virtual. But the first three were strongly, blatantly influenced by the COP presidents who had close ties to the fossil fuel industry, with the last two of them in the United Arab Emirates and Azerbaijan, where the CEOs themselves were the president of COP. Clearly a problem. Also, in the last three COPs, there were arrests of activists preliminary to COP going forward. In Brazil, it was an entirely different story. They welcomed protests. They welcomed hearing from people. So another thing I want to point out that was completely unique about the COP, which makes it different from any COP in history, is the methodology that they used in deciding what they were going to address. They went back from the beginning of COP and ferreted out all of the actions that had already been approved but not really acted on, and then they went ahead and designed programs to act on those. So one of the things that the COP president wanted to do was have a COP that truly reflected the science. So this one did, and pictured here is Johan Rockström, the director at Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research. And he tells us the Earth is warmer than it has been in 100,000 years. It is a very, very severe danger point for extreme events that will impact billions of people around the world. Excuse me here, trying to get this little globe to spin, and it may or may not. Oh, it's not. Okay, we'll just do it without it spinning. Okay, so he tells us Earth will overshoot the Paris Agreement's 1.5 degree target within the next 5 to 10 years. We already were hit with a 1.5 C rise in temperatures in 2024, but scientifically those don't count until, typically more of a decade has passed. So he says just within 5 or 10 years, we are likely to reach this limit where we will be entering the terrain of danger, both for billions of people affected by rising weather extremes and the risk of crossing tipping points of the Amazon rainforest, the coral reef system, and others. The Amazon rainforest is really at serious risk because of the deforestation, as I mentioned before, and the fires that are being set there purposely. Also, to report to you, even though this was something that the COP president called for and Lula called for in terms of actions on the forests, after COP closed, his own government, against his wishes, with the influence of the petrostates or the fossil fuel industry in Brazil, stopped that from moving forward. The coral reef system is also at risk, and many of the coral reefs have already died off. They exist in more than 100 countries and support at least 25% of marine species. We are at risk that these could become carbon sinks instead of become carbon sources instead of carbon sinks. This is really critical. This is a home of our marine biodiversity and provide ecosystems of great value to many countries. Also, I wanted to call out that the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation AMOC system is the weakest it's been in a millennium. And if that were to happen, it plays an important role in the climate system. So this is another of the tipping points that we are risking. I won't even go through the list here. I'm sure you've all heard it. The impacts of these things: more frequent droughts, extreme weather events, acidification, all of this around the world. Of course, it's a huge financial cost as well. $1 billion weather and climate disasters. Earth will overshoot the Paris Agreement's 1.5 within the next 5 or 10 years. Yes, I've called that out to you before. What Johan Rockström urgently calls for is to phase out fossil fuels, which is the primary goal and hope of COP30, although it did not happen. Invest in carbon renewal technologies. Friends, when we think about him saying that we must invest in carbon renewal technologies, this means that we have passed the time when we can possibly stop the overshoot without also investing in the renewable technologies, many of which really don't even exist. And then he says, take a planetary approach in managing our forests, oceans, wetlands, peatlands, and in a sustainable way that is cooling to the planet after we release the pressure from fossil fuels. So this is his long-term plan, absolutely critical. So when we see this sign, this is from the protests within COP30, that there were 1,600 fossil fuel lobbyists present. This is very, very concerning, of course, to everyone in the world that pays attention to these things. But at this juncture, there's a problem. A serious problem. What happens at these COPs is the petro-military industrial complex that is centered in Americans' exceptionalism and has historically demanded unilateral domination of the globe, enforced by the world's most powerful war machine, is also stopping these COPs from doing what they want to do, typically through consensus voting. Their single vote can stop anything on going forward with a roadmap to end fossil fuels or transition away from fossil fuels. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this. This comes to us thanks to the George Bush administration. It's called full spectrum dominance. This is the policy of the US military since that time, that our military would have control over all dimensions of the battle space, land surface, subsurface, air space, cyberspace, control of information space, and on and on. I bring this up because when that means they have to control the international efforts to stop climate change as well. They have to have control of everything. And part of that is because US military reliance on fossil fuels, which I would prefer we use petro-military industrial complex because they are so linked. I also want to call out the fact that for some time now, the entire globe has been divided into different areas of US military for the domination there, with US CENTCOM not being in the United States, but being in the Arab states, where the oil has is. Okay, this is a blueprint of empire projecting power at the cost of emissions. So you see all over bases around the world. And then this is a huge burden in terms of getting fossil fuel to these bases, and the fossil fuel and the bases themselves are storage places for the fossil fuels. So the integration of US militarism and the fossil fuel industry is very tightly linked with wars for oil and oil for wars. I wanted to call this out to your for your edification, in case you haven't thought too much about it, about who knows where our US forces are around the world. According to the Tom Dispatch, US Special Operations Command was in 2017 was in 149 countries. There's a great deal of secretism when we're talking about militarism and wars. The military blueprint includes a vast array of activities that most of us don't even think about, including extractive industries, manufacturing, weapons and equipment, massive supply lines. I looked in that today, and oh my God, they have a 500-page document, I think, on the supply lines. It's incredible. Training, work games, all of this. The modernizing defense logistics from factory to foxhole, converging the kill chain into supply chain enhances speed of decision making, provides demand forecasting, and provides actionable information in industry. The joint logistics enterprise can enhance demand forecasting prediction capabilities, leading to optimized supply chains and more efficient factory operations, essential to connecting foxholes to factories. So it's a rotational thing, supplier to sensor to shooter to sustainer. And what this is, it's based on AI. There's so much to know about this. I can't possibly get into it all. Battlefield intelligence operations, sustainment operations, maintenance and disruptions of the battlefield, future capabilities, on and on. And this is the direction that we are going. How much of the decisions will be left up to AI, I'm not sure, but they are putting a lot of confidence in AI to make decisions much more quickly than U.S. Personnel or warfighters. So the U.S. Department of War is the world's largest institutional user of fossil fuels, as well as the world's largest institutional emitter. The global military emissions, not including war, some 2,750 tons of CO2 equivalent are now estimated to be more than 5.5% of the whole, yet they are still not mandatorily reported to the UN, the UNFCCC. So that figure there, it is the amount of tonnage between 2001 and 2018 in Afghanistan, Iraq, Pakistan, and Syria wars in Syria. So as someone who has long dedicated myself to addressing these issues as a Unitarian, some of my concerns have been met with the response that UUs support just wars. While this may be true and it may be honorable, I must ask if we might entertain the response of combat veterans when we ask this question. I'm saying this as the daughter of a combat veteran, as a widow of a combat veteran, as somebody who has worked with combat veterans for many years and heard many, many stories about what is going on in these wars. Sometimes when I talk to my other UU friends, people that I care about very much, there's just an information gap. What we're dealing with often is such tremendous reverence for the US military. And our military members pay the price, believe me. So I just want to swiftly address the issue of the just wars. For generations, many of our soldiers have been placed in the grievous position of killing, dying, and polluting to ensure access to the same fossil fuels that have now put all species and ourselves at risk. And what I'm talking about here are the wars in Afghanistan for pipelines and the war in Iraq for oil, the wars that we talk about all the time that are targeting nations that are essentially fossil fuel rich. I'm going to move now to a disheartening subject, but I have to tell you, in 2021, it was reported that 30,000 plus active duty personnel and veterans who have served in the military since 9/11 have died by suicide. This is 4 times the rate of those killed in the same wars. So if you want to talk, or any of my UU brothers and sisters would like to talk about just wars, I beg you, please, to look at this kind of data, because I am very familiar with it. My husband himself was suicidal on many occasions as a veteran from Vietnam, because when our soldiers go into these wars and they come back, they carry the burden in their DNA. And my husband carried that until to his deathbed. So the remaining carbon budget is something that is not discussed very much anymore. We did hear about it earlier on quite a bit, but the remaining carbon budget that humans can still emit without exceeding a chosen global warming limit is often used to evaluate political action against the goals of the Paris Agreement. Researchers have concluded that the remaining carbon budget for a 50% chance of keeping warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial times is 250 gigatons of carbon. And that data was as of January 23rd. That equals around 6 years of current CO2 emissions from 2023, which means that we will have reached our remaining carbon budget to stay at the keep 50% chance of keeping warming to the 1.5 degrees Celsius. So when we talk about wars, when we talk about interventions in other countries, when we talk just about militarism and building F-35s that are relying on massive amounts of fossil fuels, we are setting ourselves up to bypass this in huge numbers. If we were going to actually keep within the remaining carbon budget and do it in a way that was just, and we would be allowing this carbon budget to be used by the developing nations who need it desperately in order to mitigate and climate and also adapt. This comment is from UN Secretary Antonio Guterres. I put it against the background of a photo taken here in Ventura County, where I live, where we have lost 1,000 homes in the fires here. We are on the road to climate hell with our foot still on the accelerator. This UN climate conference is a reminder that the answer is in our hands and the clock is ticking. We are in the fight of our lives and we are losing. Greenhouse gas emissions keep growing, global temperatures keep rising, and our planet is fast approaching tipping points that will make climate chaos irreversible. So, to my UU brothers and sisters, I am really hoping that this talk can be something that will trigger a dialogue. I'm very glad to speak with any of you at your churches or any groups, or Veterans for Peace has presentations they give. We need to, as a group of churches that are supposed to be on the front lines with liberal policies, we can't just push forward in terms of climate in our communities, in greening our churches, in our personal lives. We have to begin at least to look at the fact that we are not going to meet the 1.5 degrees Celsius limit of the Paris Agreement if we continue to ignore the massive emissions of militarism and wars, which still are not required to be reported. Towards the end of COP, the whole issue of transitioning off of fossil fuels almost ended the conference, with Saudi Arabia, Russia, the other Arabian states, a few others absolutely not wanting to do that. People stayed up all night trying to negotiate it. Something saved us. Nobody really wanted to end COP as an entity itself, because that would be a triumph for Trump and the US not showing up. This is what saved us, in my view. Colombia raised their flag. They are collaborating with the Netherlands. After all these years, which are more than 3 decades of COP trying to find a way out of climate, we have not been able to really address fossil fuels as an issue except in one COP. Colombia has agreed with the support of Netherlands to hold a climate summit addressing a transition off of fuels in April. Thank you, Colombia. If men who wage war were at COP, we would realize that it's far cheaper to dedicate $1.3 trillion to solving the problem than $2.7 trillion on waging war. Thank you, President Lula. There's a new book out. I would love it if you guys would check this out, The $1 Trillion War Machine. It talks about the rise of the permanent war budget, the military-industrial congressional complex, the blank check, on and on. An excellent book. We are putting our money towards war and militarism rather than address climate. And with the 5% gross domestic product required of all NATO nations, this is pushing the envelope even faster. So we have to confront the DoD. We have got to do it. We've got to turn it into a bird for peace and address our survival on Earth. Thank you all very much for joining me. Gregory, you can go ahead and intro Carmen. Thank you all.
Yes, thank you, Cindy. Please, again, hold your questions until the end. We will get to them, but throw them in the chat or write them down, and we will collect them and have a Q&A at the end. But for our next speaker, Carmen Capriles, she is an environmental advocate and an agronomist. Agronomist. She'll have to explain that one to us. That's a good thing. From La Paz, Bolivia. She's the founder of Reacción Climática, a collective promoting climate justice and civic participation in environmental policy, and she's part of the advocacy team of the International Convocation of UNFCCC for the United Nations. Carmen has engaged in the United Nations climate and environmental negotiations, working on issues such as sustainable development, biodiversity, and women's and indigenous rights. Carmen?
Thank you very much. Let me. Well, thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you, Cindy, for that presentation. I think that was amazing and really took us to one of the core issues that we have to face right now, which is what is happening in the world. The world is going through a very, very tough time right now. And let me see if I can share my screen.
You should be able to. There you go.
Yes, there you go. So, well, something happened, but let's start here with the SDGs. Because as Cindy was explaining a few minutes ago, we live in a very, very complex world, and right now we are facing a number of issues. But a fun fact is that 10 years ago, I was part of the team that was helping draft the Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development. I am a firm believer in sustainable development. And one of the discussions we were having 10 years ago is that NATO shouldn't exist anymore. And instead of like putting so much money in NATO, we should be putting that money into the Agenda 2030 in order to achieve this new agenda and these new goals that we were like at the time talking, which is the main one is no poverty, is living in a planet where you don't have poverty, or you don't have hunger, you have good health, you have quality education, gender equality, things that are basic for every human being, I think. So we were around all this discussion, but we also had like the discussion around climate change. It's 2015. We didn't know if there was going to be a Paris Agreement or not. So we were, okay, let's push for climate action, even though we don't know what will happen in Paris at the end of the year. So that's why we push, and we were able to have a goal 13 for climate action. And I know that for many people, 70 goals is too much. Why? And things like that. But I think it's a very clear roadmap on how we all have to move forward, especially like goal 16, which is related to peace. and strong institutions. Because if we have strong institutions, it is more likely that we can, one, fight authoritarianism, and two, have less corruption and less violence. So I think I like when I see like the goals in a circle, because that kind of like shows how it shows the circularity of of the idea, and not only like the squares that you usually see. But going back to the issue, we were starting to talk about all these issues and clean energy. So we were working for toward a transition. We want to phase out from fossil fuels, and we need alternative ways of energy, alternative ways that are democratic, that are accessible, that do not rely on this monopolies or or that energy is in a few hands, like happens now. So we were at this discussion about critical minerals and so on, and in 2022, not so long ago, we were so happy that the transition toward energies was happening, and that we needed an agreement around the minerals for the mining of the minerals for the energy transition. These are called critical minerals. So because, yeah, we need minerals for the energy transition, but what's happening if you go to any mining site, you're going to see that there is exploitation, that there's no human rights, and especially if you go to mines in the south, there are all these conditions that are not acceptable. And there is one reason why mining is not on the SDGs, because mining is not sustainable. And it's not sustainable because once you take out the definition of sustainable development, mean we have to meet our needs without compromising the needs of the next generation. What happens with mining is that once we take out like the resource from the ground, there is no way we're going to be able to put it back for the next generations. And that happens with basically minerals and with oil. So both of those activities are never sustainable. They can be responsible with the environment and, oh, sorry, responsible with the environment and responsible with the communities where the mining is being done. So this is examples of some critical minerals that at the time we were talking. So we were happy because there was a transition to alternative sources of energy, like wind energy and solar energy. And in some places, even you had thermal energy, which is from the geysers and things like that. But what happens after 2022, it changes the whole thing, because we have a huge invasion from one of the biggest countries, which is Russia, to Ukraine. And suddenly our planet becomes again a huge mess. So all this progress that we were trying to work around phasing out of fossil fuels and this critical minerals, responsible mining, kind of like ends up in a second place. And it was so clear during COP30. The other COPs, you still, like in Dubai, it was the first time we were able to put fossil fuels in the text. Fossil fuels are one of the causes. So it was important to have that talk. But in 2030, it was like, is someone even in listening? because for me, one of the main problems that we have when we talk about the Paris Agreement is that it's in temperature and is in centigrades. And of course, US uses Fahrenheit, doesn't use centigrades. And what happens is that for Americans, we're the population that really need to help achieve these goals, it becomes harder because it's a concept that they don't manage. The rest of the planet does. So it's like another language, which is interesting because for the rest of the world, all the texts that are in English, we have to translate and everything. But the most important goal that we have is not in English terms, let's say. So that's one of the biggest problems that we have around the Paris Agreement. The other one is that is around temperature, and it shouldn't be around temperature. It should be around the other sources that we can measure, which is basically the CO2 sources, the big CO2 sources that come from the industries, the burning of forests, things like that. That is something that we can measure and we know where are the sources and we can control those sources. Temperature is something that is so global and so abstract that we have managed to have like a budget, but still it's still very incomprehensible, very non-tangible. So, but what we do know is that we can no longer keep on putting CO2 in the atmosphere. If we keep on putting CO2 in the atmosphere keeps heating up. And what is happening as soon as it heats up, you are having problems with droughts because the heat of the atmosphere is taking the humidity of not only the atmosphere, but also of the soil. So you have heat droughts that affect a lot of food production because you need healthy soils and humidity to produce any kind of food. And also in many other places, because that humidity it does not stay in one place, you have floods because all that humidity is taken to other places and suddenly start raining and it generates floods. And the other thing is that the atmosphere is so hot that as soon as something starts burning, since the atmosphere is so hot, it's really easy for fire to propagate because there isn't any humidity that could help limit the fire, to control the fire. So that's why in the last years we have seen these huge fires that before were like exceptional for some places, but now we're seeing that in the Amazon, we have seen them in Australia, in Greece, in Spain, in Los Angeles, in the US, in Canada, and in all these places, and they're not going to stop. They are increasing in strength every year. And that puts not only our food supply in problems because we don't have enough water to produce or too much water. If we have to deal with floods, then we have to deal with problems of infrastructure, housing, and so on. And if we have to deal with fires, we also have that problem. That's why there is this initiative of keep the fossil in the ground. That is an initiative that's been going on for a lot of years. Cindy already talked that Colombia and Netherlands, they are going to host the first international conference of just transition away from fossil fuels. And to conclude, there is one thing that for me was very important that we got from the COP30, which is the Action Gender Plan. This is the Action Gender Plan within the framework of the Convention on Climate Change. It is important because it needs to, climate change, besides all the other things, is it's gender driven. It doesn't affect the same men as women. And it's important to understand that. And in order to see that reflected, we need data. And we need disaggregated data by not only women and men, but also by age, also by social situation, economical situation, and so on, to be able to evaluate those impacts. So the Gender Action Plan is a plan for 9 years until 2035 that is going to help that the convention takes into account these gender aspects, that is gender responsive, that supports participation and leadership of women within the convention, that it takes care of data and monitoring that data. Then also, which is very important, the protection of women environmental defenders. So we hope that this builds momentum for equitable climate governance, and also that it aligns with the global commitments that we already have around gender equality, not only in the climate change COP, but also in other tools like the Agenda 2030 and the Convention on the Status of Women. So this was the big manifestation in Belen that are asking like the governments to take action on climate change before it's too late. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much,
I am
Carmen.
open to any question.
Yes, please, everyone, put your questions, if you have any, in the chat, and we can start doing a Q&A before we close out our time here. We did have two things written in the chat that I'll go ahead and read for now. And one is from Robert, who said that his dad is also, or was, a combat veteran, a lieutenant and a lieutenant colonel, and that Robert therefore shares the same doubt of just war theory, and is also hoping to bring this sort of message to Louisiana. And then Sally asks, I think this is for Cindy, what is meant by carbon renewal technology? And Carmen, you can probably answer this too, though. And what is the chance of getting mandatory reporting of military emissions? So Cindy, you're on mute if you want to jump off mute and respond.
Before I jump in, I just really want to thank Carmen for that wonderful presentation. Carmen, you're so absolutely right. When you're talking about Americans and we're talking about 1.5C, you know, I think the point that you made there in your talk about checking the carbon emissions at the source, the big ones, was really, really good. So I really appreciate that. And I was so glad too that you brought up the issue of gender, which has been long and hard fought for and so much needed and well deserved. So in terms of the question, and Carmen, please feel free to jump in on this. And if anybody else on the call wants to jump in on it too about carbon carbon removal technologies, I don't honestly know that much about them. The one that Lucy always pushes, and which is just lovely, is planting trees. You know, forest, that takes some time. And I'm a little embarrassed because it's something that I haven't really looked at that much. From what I saw, it doesn't seem like there's really viable carbon technologies out there. To me, it seemed like a lot of times at the COPs, they're pushing all these carbon technologies. They're big, big money deals, and they're going to be big, big, big money deals. But in terms of what they really offer, from what I've understood, they're incredibly expensive and the technology isn't all that well developed. So that's rather an inadequate response. What was the second? Well, let's see if anybody else has that. And then there was a second question. Does Carmen, do you want to jump in on that, or does anybody in the audience want to jump in on it?
I can explain a little bit about the carbon renewable technologies, which, as Cindy mentioned, are basically trees, but we call them false solutions because they sound very nice, but they're not really, they have a lot of caveats. And one is that if I am, because it's like, I want to keep on contaminating. So in order for me to keep on contaminating, please, you in the South, do not contaminate and take care of your trees. But it doesn't work that way because the emissions in the North do not go to the South. So there is a Coriolis effect where the emissions in the North will stay in the North. That's why the North is heating up much faster than the South. And the emissions in the South are going to stay in the South. So it's not like if we're protecting forests in South America, they're going to be taking the carbon from North America. So it doesn't work that way, but they want you to think it works that way. The other problem with this, the carbon markets, what they call it, is that I am a big business enterprise around computers or ITs or whatever. And I connect to this hacendado in the south that has tons of land. Nobody knows how, but they have land. So my company, because it's using all this energy for computers or ITs or whatever, is paying this hacendado or this person, this private person in South America to take care of their forest so I can keep on doing. When you have that kind of mechanism around carbon markets, you cannot really see if it's working or not. That's why you have to get countries involved. But most countries do not have legal frameworks that will allow that a company in the North could like put money in the country, not into a specific company or a particular person or an hacendado or whoever that has the. So that's one of the biggest failures because it's also been 30 years of trying to impose these carbon markets and they haven't worked because it's also speculations. It got to a point that a ton of CO2 was worth $2. So if it's worth $2 and I'm a big company like, I don't know, Triple X, then I can just pay those $2. So it's not such a big deal. That's why it shouldn't be a market. It should be a tax. So you're emitting more carbon, pay a tax, and this tax should go, I don't know, to the rest of the world or something like that. I know we don't like taxes, but it's one of the ways to do it. But we need to ensure that the countries are the ones that can access the money. And it's not only between privates to privates because when it's privates to privates, it's really hard to see where the money is going or who is really doing the things and who is really not doing the things. But it makes you see in the web page and everything very nice that they are paying and you're paying extra to have your carbon removed in some place in the Amazonia in Brazil or whatever but it doesn't work that way. The other thing is around militarization, because that's the other thing about energy transition, is that militarization needs a lot of energy. And AI right now, which is something that we haven't talked about it, also needs a lot of energy. So where are we going to get that energy? And right now for AI, most of the AI use, the extra energy is being paid by only Americans because the Americans companies are the ones that are providing the service, for example, and that goes direct to your energy bill somehow. It's not the companies that are paying for that extra energy. So it's important to analyze where is the energy going, what's the energy being used for, and what is going to cost us long term. In militarization is the same because all this use of energy to produce weapons and things like that is being paid by someone. And that someone, not usually the business. It's spread around the whole system, so everybody ends up paying for that. And that's the big failure that we had this year that for me is like frustrating is that NATO was able to increase 5% their budget on militarization. And that means that we are heading for a long-term, small impact war for at least a decade that we're going to have to. And yeah, I think that we're also facing a problem with global values. And that's where we talk with Cindy about it and with other UUs. It is important that we create and we work on these global values in order to oppose to militarization, in order to generate cultures of peace, in order to really focus on our responsibility with creation and climate change and biodiversity, and not just use it and throw it, and then we don't know where everything is coming or going. Thank you. I hope I answered the questions.
Another question that came in is from Dick, and he asked, how do you address economic growth when alternative fuels take over? Is it possible, or will there be degrowth?
Say that again. How do you
address economic growth when alternative fuels take over? Is it possible, or will there be degrowth? Will there be degrowth?
I don't know, Dick. You're the economist.
Let me give you a couple questions.
Um,
How are we going to know when we pass the tipping point?
Oh, we
wow.
already.
Yeah, we're passing it right now. I mean, you can see the speeding up of everything. And when you look at the corals, I mean, they're dying off. We're seeing sea level rise now. I mean, it's we haven't. I don't know. Do you want to elucidate more on that, Carmen? If you're thinking that we're already there, we might already be there.
In the case of economic growth, right now, if we see the list of countries that are in debt, there is only two countries that are not in debt, which is Luxembourg and Monaco. All the other countries are in debt. And the way we understand debt is that somebody is giving the money and somebody has like the whole, but somebody has extra money. So what is happening right now, why you don't have countries that are holding that money, is because our debt is no longer among countries. Our debt has started to be with the same planet. So the fact that we are able to keep printing money, because before you had like the pattern, the gold pattern, but now you don't, you just print it. And besides like having physical like money, dollars or yens or whatever, you also have Bitcoins that also require a lot of energy. So all this money that is going around in the world that we cannot even imagine, like every time they say 50 trillion, 300 trillion, 200 billion, it's so hard to imagine those numbers. And it's because that it's our debt with the planet, that we have been using more resources than we have. And that's why every time it's harder to that's why we are facing all these problems around climate change, is because we are really damaging the planet itself. So it's not, why do we have 70% of the species in endangered species? Why are they going extinct? What are we doing that is driving them crazy? And all these transactions, all this money, all this, and I don't I don't really I don't think like it's the idea of the growth is oversimplistic because we are very complicated. As much money as we keep on spending, as more impact we're having on our planet. But it's not so straightforward because we cannot see it. So the answers are much more complex than just saying, do not eat meat, which is one good thing that you can do, or recycle. But the growth is also among those solutions that are that try to oversimplify the problem. And our problems are much more complex in that sense, that we can not just pinpoint at one issue, but it's the complexity of having to deal with population, with too much assets, with oil, with this energy thirst, with AI, with all this technology that is advancing so fast. So I'm not really sure where we're heading. If you would have told me, if you would have asked me in 2015, for me, the world was it was much more straightforward, the answer. We have to keep the fossil fuels on ground. We have to work on a transition. We have to be more aware of like eating meat and things like that. And this the spectrum of things you could do to live in a better world. But right now, things are much more complicated with ongoing wars, with AI, and with a lot of inequality problems that we thought being that they were going to be resolved. And suddenly, again, you have big gaps. So I don't think there is an easy answer for that. We don't know where we're going to be here in five years from now.
Okay, Rebecca asked whether she says she, I'm not sure whether she's speaking to Cindy or Carmen or both of you, which is more, is deforestation killing more diversity, more biodiversity than fossil pipelines? In other words,
Is deforestation
killing more biodiversity
killing more diversity
than fossil pipelines?
than fossil pipelines? Fossil fuel pipelines. I don't know that anybody's technically looked at that. We know that the rainforest is just full of biodiversity, so that's definitely a huge, huge loss. I haven't given a lot of thought to how fossil fuel pipelines kill biodiversity, but of course that's got to be massive as well, because if it's all about moving oil where it can put emissions up into the atmosphere. So I would hate to hazard a guess on that, but it's a great question. And they both seem like just deadly for trying to save our planet.
She did include a paper on deforestation and thanked both of you. Carmen, did you have a thought on
Well,
that?
maybe she knows. Maybe she can say, yeah, go ahead. Yeah,
She had to
Carmen.
leave, so yeah.
Oh, they're two different things, but if you want pipelines for fossil fuels, like for example, in my country, from Bolivia to Brazil, you had to do a huge operation of deforestation in the Amazon to have that pipeline. Of course, you have pipelines in Alaska where there isn't like, well, probably a little bit of taiga forest, but many go on permafrost, and they have a huge impact on permafrost, for example. So it depends where the pipeline is going to be put on. So there isn't an easy answer to that question. But I'm going to read the paper. Thank you for sending
Yes,
it.
yes. please. Yeah, can you share it with us?
Yeah,
We'd both like
that's
to
at
read it.
8:53 in chat,
Okay, and
Yeah,
one more thing.
I think I grabbed.
and I will be saving the chat. So,
Oh, thank
to
you.
what extent does the UU process pay systemic attention to creating intersectional collaboration among the various currently fragmented civil society movements? From Moji.
That's a good question, Moji. You know, pay systemic attention to creating
I think
intersectional collaboration. I guess there is some with that. Yeah, go ahead, Carmen. Did you want to say
yes, no,
something?
because Karen is in the call, and with her and with the
Yes.
International Convocation of UU-Women, we've been trying to engage a lot with the global movement toward sustainable development. So we're part of the major groups. The major groups are this networks of NGOs and of women organizations or faith-based that can participate as observers in the UN processes. So we're trying to enforce that, to make that participation effective, to go and collaborate with other faith-based organizations, with other women organizations, and to try to build global communities toward what we were talking about, this crisis around values that it's important to address if we want to move forward. Thank you.
Oh, that's really good response. Yeah, I think within the UUA, you know, there we have a climate-focused group that is trying to reach out to different churches, and I did go to the last meeting. I don't normally attend that, but they've been working with a lot of the churches within the U.S. on things like greening the church and that kind of thing, bringing people together that way. So I know that there is some of that. And then UUJEC, we also try to collaborate with other organizations. And if there's anybody here on this call who would like to collaborate further, either with the International Convocation of UU-Women or with UUJEC, please let us know. We'd love to be in touch with you. It looks like Dick's had his hand up for a long time.
Oh, sorry. I'm reading the chat. Go ahead, Dick.
I asked my question in the chat earlier, actually.
What is it? I know that you were asking about
The growth and degrowth.
Yep.
the
Okay.
growth and the degrowth. Yes.
Right.
Was there discussion or recognition at COP30 of how dirty nuclear energy is in reality? We're facing, more and more subsidies for it here. Yeah.
When I was looking at that issue, wasn't this COP, but it was the COP before this. They were really pushing nuclear energy in a big way with small reactors that can be built very quickly. And I didn't see any discussion at all on how dirty they were. Carmen, do you have something else to add to that?
Oh yeah, .org. The problem, for me, nuclear energy is also an ethical problem. Okay, we can use the nuclear energy. It's less costing CO2, but the problem is that that material, once we use it in the central, it needs at least 1,000 years until it all stops emitting radiation. And you need to put it in concrete and things like that to dispose it properly. And who knows who's going to be here in 1,000 years? I don't think any human is going to be here in 1,000 years. So for me, it's an ethical big problem to leave nuclear waste lying around, even if it's in concrete or in whatever. Because once any living thing gets to that nuclear waste, is going to have damage on their DNA. And I think Chernobyl has a huge amount of examples on how damage on DNA is reflected in animals. Not humans, but all the animals that have supported the radiation and adapted and so on that are there. And you can see like what are the problems that they're all deformed. Is that how you say it?
Yep.
So for me, that's the ethical problem about nuclear energy. If you wouldn't have nuclear waste, that wouldn't be a problem. But there is also a problem that many of the nuclear waste is also being used without telling no one in armament. And I think that's a big problem, and that's one of the risks if the wars keep on escalating, that we may see that in different ways. But yeah, no, I have some information around it. It's not like 100%, but it's important to know. For me, it's that ethical problem of leaving my next 10 generations the responsibility of taking care of this nuclear waste that I use for, I don't know, playing a game in my computer, for example, and being like, I don't think is worth it.
Carmen, I think, yeah, we are like mind on that. But in terms of what is being presented at COP itself, I didn't hear anything on the downside of using nuclear energy. When I was there, it looked like, there's so much going on, folks. I mean, they have 300 side events a day. There's no way that you're going to catch all of it. But I'm just saying, I didn't see anything that was really opposing nuclear energy. I just saw it being pushed.
Yeah. Oh, I just lost a question there. Would a well-funded...
It seems...
Go ahead. I've got a question from Larry here. Would a well-funded, robust UN peacekeeping capability reduce militarization worldwide and reduce atmospheric carbon?
I love that.
Right.
Question. What a beautiful concept, Larry. I've often wondered that myself, because it seems like the United Nations seems so incredibly ineffectual. I mean, to me, I don't know what any of you out there may have thought, but to me, it looks like, since they aren't doing any peacekeeping missions to the extent that they're really needed. I mean, particularly when we look at Gaza, but elsewhere as well, it's I guess there was some peacekeeping in Lebanon. If there's peacekeeping in Gaza, I mean, they were killed themselves. The UN people were killed in Gaza. It seems to me like the power and control that NATO has is a counterpoint to anything that the United Nations might want to accomplish. I think it's a wonderful idea. We don't think they have the money. The U.S. has withdrawn all of our funding. Do you have any thoughts on that yourself, Larry?
Yeah, I was. It just seemed to me that
it's good to see you again, by the way.
Oh, good. Yeah, good to see you again, Cindy. Yeah, it seemed to me that one of the one of the big reasons why there's so many conflicts around the world is we used to have United Nations peacekeeping forces, which would go in and keep sides apart and put fires out. And I may be wrong, but it seems like it doesn't have the money to do that. It doesn't have the power to do that, and it would seem like efforts to enhance to enhance its peacekeeping capabilities would reduce militarization, make nations feel safer, from their neighbors, and we would not have as much. We wouldn't be destroying the climate by militarizing, and all the militarizing our nations. Not the United States and the major powers are the big contributors, but also around the world. So that's just my question is it something that we just have basically let the United Nations or wither, and it seems like it could be a major benefactor. I mean, it could be a major remedy in solving a militarization and then the climate crisis.
Yeah, I would agree with you. What a wonderful concept. It just doesn't seem to be happening.
Yeah, and Moji had included in his question, which we discussed, mention of chambers of compassion in contrast to chambers of commerce, and he's got a link there at 960. Check that out.
What a great idea.
And the last question I see, I think, is that we have an election coming up. How can we get candidates to express what they will do to counteract climate change and voters to care more about it?
Who's that question from?
Let's see.
Does it say? It's okay. It doesn't matter. I just was wondering. Yeah. Oh gosh, that's so critical. All I know is to start pressuring everybody. It seems like climate is getting lost in the shuffle when we have to deal with ice and we have to deal with National Guard on our streets, some of us, and we have to deal with our own economic stresses throughout all the different states, and we're dealing with every day something new coming out of this administration that's really, really difficult to even contemplate. It seems like climate is getting lost. So for those of us that do care about climate, I just think we need to keep calling, contacting, maybe bring it to attention everywhere we can and bringing it into our conversations. But if anybody has ideas about that, those of you in the audience, as well as Carmen, it would be great to hear from you.
Yes. I love the idea of the Interfaith Climate Coalition. I think it's important that within our communities, we start talking about climate change, but also working about readiness, about being ready, because we know that it's going to hit us any moment, and it may have like it may be a tornado, it may be a wildfire, it may be a landslide, it may have different, and we need to be ready. And that's where we rely on our communities. So I don't think we have to keep on talking about climate change, something that is going to be solved in a COP, in a conference somewhere around the world. But we need to start talking with our communities, with our congregations, and try to make this safe space, that if something happens, we're going to be there for each other. That even though we're facing dark times, we're there for each other. I think that is the most positive way to be ready to face climate change. We cannot just, we can do efforts around fossil fuels, around energy, around meat consumption, but the most important right now is to work with our communities to identify which is the most probable impact. Maybe a drought, it may be a fire, it may be a drought. It depends on the area where you are. So you need to gather like that information and try to work with the community to be ready for in case something happens, we can be there for each other and it doesn't become a chaos, or we don't depend on federal money or who knows. So I think that's the most important part that we can do around climate change. Be ready and be there for the rest of our community.
Thank you, Carmen. You know, that's been a big discussion at UUJC for a long time, and Lucy Hitchcock is on this call, and she has been pushing so hard for working within the small communities to address exactly that. Oh, she's got her hand up. Hey, Lucy.
Go ahead, Lucy.
She's one of our board members.
My concern about this is how little climate is getting even mentioned in the press, in the UUA. And I live in Salem, Oregon. I went to a city council meeting that was on the planning for the next 5 years. Climate and environment were not mentioned. It's very scary to me that it has just disappeared from the dialogue. And at the very least, if there's anything we can do with media to get the word out, that would be good. I'm not good on media, but it seems to me that there are people that are and could think of how to have stories or fights or whatever it is to get people caring about it again, because to me it's disappearing, except in our groups that have come together on that topic.
I am a co-host of Ecologic and Environmental Radio Show on WBAI, and one of our guests on this year's COP show was the mayor of Mount Vernon, who attended a local leaders international meeting in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil a week or so before COP. And she was quite enthused about the mayors of the 40 biggest cities and many mayors from around the world and county people and local government types who are really looking at working on this issue. So there's stuff that we don't see, which is good.
Yeah, that's very important. Yeah, I've heard about the mayors many times, and it's wonderful. I put something in the chat, you guys. This is the email address of Pablo de Jesus, who heads up, let's see, you use for, what is it?
Social justice.
Yeah. Thanks, social justice. Anyway, I put his email there because if anybody on this call is in support of addressing the role of militarism on climate, I would appreciate you letting Pablo know, because Pablo has told me that he's hearing from people that no, we need to have a strong military for just wars. So if anybody wants to reach out to Pablo with an alternative point of view, he's one of our key players at the UUA here in at the national level.
The last comment here, and one of the later comments in chat from Robert, who says he's on the board of the Greater New Orleans Interfaith Climate Coalition and would like to collaborate with others. And he's already starting to work with Green Faith. He left his email in there. I have been on they haven't been active recently, but there was a Green Faith climate circle that was working on getting individuals and congregations to divest from fossil fuels. And so that was a good effort. I should go back and check what they're up to. So
you've got your email in here, Robert? I'm looking for it.
It's 9:31.
Okay.
Well, if do folks have some last words? We're 9:38. We're kind of ready to wind down, but if we've got some last words.
I just want to thank everybody for coming. I didn't do that when you all arrived. It's helpful to have somebody here when we do bring in guests, and I'm very, very grateful for Carmen to joining us. She's just such an incredible figure in what she's been doing, and it's wonderful to have Karen with us. Thank you so much for Karen. Just thank everybody. It's just great to see you all. Thank you, Robert. I'm glad for the work you're doing.
As always, we will get this recording up on YouTube relatively soon. And we'll share that link around. In January, our presentation will be by Gregory Stevens on eco-socialism and jet pig. So we hope you'll join us for that.
Thank you, everybody.
Yes.
Thank you, Terry, for
Thank
coming on. Thank you,
you.
everybody. Robert, if you want to
Bye.
get in touch, I put my email down there. Bye, everyone. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
you both.
Okay. I'll give you a few short time to save the chat, and then well, actually, I'll leave meeting. I don't know that I can end it for all, so.